people who vote for me only because of my race. There are probably some of those too. The overwhelming part of the American population, I think, is right now following this debate, and they're trying to figure out, is this going to help me? You know, is health care going to make me better off? Now, there's some who, setting aside the issue of race, actually I think are more passionate about the idea of whether government can do anything right. And I think that's probably the biggest driver of some of the vitriol
right now. They're going to raise their taxes.
Well, it goes beyond taxes. I mean, I think that what we're seeing right now is a part of a running debate that we saw during FDR, we saw during Ronald Reagan. Anytime there's a president who is proposing big changes that seem to implicate the size of government, that gets everybody's juices flowing. And sometimes, you know, you get some pretty noisy debate. But just to finish the thought, I think what I'm proposing is a very modest attempt to make sure that hard-working families out there are going to have the security of health insurance that they can count on. This isn't a radical plan. This isn't grafting a single-payer model onto the United States. It's simply trying to deal with what everybody acknowledges is a big problem. I think that there are some opponents who've seized on this and tried to use this as a proxy for saying that somehow we are vastly expanding government and taking over every sector of the economy. That's what a lot of this debate is about. I think they're wrong. The one thing I hope is that we can have a civil argument about it, and that we are able to acknowledge good motives on both sides. Everybody's a patriot. Each of us are Americans that care deeply about this country. And sometimes I think that, frankly, the media encourages some of the outliers in behavior, because, let's face it, the easiest way to get on television right now is to be really rude. If you're just being sensible and giving people the benefit of the doubt and you're making your arguments, you don't get time on the nightly news.
You might on Sunday morning.
If you say something outrageous, you're there in a hot second.
But have some of your allies made it easier for handed your opponents some ammunition, like Acorn, for example?
Well, look, you know, I think that are there folks in the Democratic camp or on the left who haven't always operated in ways that I'd appreciate? Absolutely.
Congress said they should cut off all funding for Acorn. Are you for that?
Is that true on the other side as well? Of course that's true.
How about the funding for Acorn?
You know, frankly, it's not really something I've followed closely. I didn't even know that Acorn was getting a whole lot of federal money.
Both the Senate and the House have voted to cut it off.
You know, what I know is that what I saw on that video was certainly inappropriate and deserves to be
investigated. So you're not committing to cut off the federal funding?
George, this is not the biggest issue facing the country. It's not something I'm paying a lot of attention to.
Afghanistan is a big issue facing the country.
That is a big issue. That's worth talking about.
You were for a flexible timeline in Iraq. Some people are now saying that's exactly what should happen in Afghanistan, and the same conditions hold. Do you agree with that?
Here's what I think. When we came in, basically there'd been drift in our Afghan strategy. Everybody acknowledges that. And I ordered a top-to-bottom review. The most important thing I wanted was us to refocus on why we're there. We're there because Al-Qaeda killed 3,000 Americans, and we cannot allow extremists who want to do violence to the United States to be able to operate with impunity. Now, I think we lost that focus for a while, and you started seeing a classic case of mission creep, where we're just there and we start taking on a whole bunch of different missions. I wanted to narrow it. I did order 21,000 additional troops there to make sure that we could secure the election, because I thought that was important. That was before the review was completed. I also said after the election I wanted to do another review. We've just gotten those 21,000 in. General McChrystal, who's only been there a few months, has done his own assessment. I am now going to take all this information and we're going to test whatever resources we have against our strategy. which is if by sending young men and women into harm's way we are defeating Al-Qaeda, and that can be shown to a skeptical audience, namely me, somebody who's always asking hard questions about deploying troops, then we will do what's required to keep the American people safe.
So no final decision. I just have one last question.
Well, the only thing I want to say, though, is that I just want to make sure that everybody understands that you don't make decisions about resources before you have the strategy right.
I just have time for one final question. I'm sure you know the story about John Kennedy's first summit with Nikita Khrushchev back in his first year in office. He meets with Khrushchev. Khrushchev cleans his clock.
Yeah.
Kennedy walks out and knows that's exactly what's happened. I know there are no perfect analogies, but what's the moment in the last 8 months where you took a step back and said, wow, I'm going to have to step up my game?
Yeah. You know, it's an interesting question. I mean, I don't mean to be immodest here, but I don't think I've had that moment with a world leader where I said, gee, we've got to really tighten things up. I think there have been times where I have said I've got to step up my game in terms of talking to the American people about issues like healthcare. I mean, I think during this whole healthcare debate, there have been times where I've said,
you lost control?
Well, not so much lost control, but where I've said to myself, somehow I'm not breaking through. And it's not, I know my critics would just say, well, it's because the plan is just, the wrong one. But that's not so much it. This has been a sufficiently tough, complicated issue with so many moving parts that, no matter how much I've tried to keep it digestible, it's very hard for people to get their whole arms around it. And that's been a case where I have been humbled, and I just keep on trying harder because I really think it's the right thing to do for the country.
Thanks very much for sitting with us.
Great to talk to you. Thank you.